Hi friends, this is Callie. Thanks so much for joining me here on the Hero Arts YouTube channel. Today I'm sharing a card made using the Build-A-Tree set with the snow and froth technique. Or on this particular card, I like to call it flocking. It adds texture, color, and shine to your embossed elements and depends on the embossing powder that you use. We'll talk more about that later, but first here I'm going to stamp the elements from the Build-A-Tree set. And instead of building an actual tree, we're going to go ahead and create a wreath instead. I'm stamping several of each of the pine sprigs first, and to give my pines some shading and color variation, I'm going to first stamp with the lighter green. Using a finger dauber, I'm going to remove some of the color from the centers of the stems. This isn't absolutely necessary, but I didn't want to layer too much ink since that can blur the details on an image. Next, I'm going to use the darker green color to stamp my images once more, and then using my finger dauber, I'm going to remove ink from the outer edges of those pine needles. The lighter green has already been stamped, so we want that to show through. This creates a light transition between the darker green and the lighter green so that you can see a soft blend between the two colors. Now I'm going to stamp with the brown, and with my finger dauber, once more I'm going to remove as much color as I can from the outer pines. And so the stem is the goal here to be brown, and then there's also that smooth transition into the pines. I went ahead and did this twice more to make sure that I had enough pines for my wreath, and then I also stamped the other foliage with intensified black ink so that I can Copic color some greens with the G21 marker and the G46 marker. You'll notice that I don't spend a whole lot of time blending these because I know that a lot of it will be covered up with the flocking that we're going to be doing later. Okay, so I've die cut all of my images here, and we're going to begin flocking our images. As I mentioned earlier, you can add snow or shine depending on the type of embossing powder that you use. So for snow, if you want a lot of dimension, I would use white puff powder. Hero Arts actually has a snow and froth kit where you can get this crystal clear lacquer pen as well as white puff embossing powder. If you don't want something quite as heavy dimensionally, you can use regular white embossing powder. So it just depends on the look that you're going for. Today I want a soft powdery shine, so I'm using sparkle embossing powder. As you can see, the technique itself is very simple. You just add the crystal clear lacquer and then you cover it with embossing powder and then heat activate it. When it's activated with heat, the embossing powder will melt and the lacquer dries, leaving a bubbled texture but also activating the embossing powder. I wanted to add some white branches to my wreath, so I also die cut a few branches from the Curiosities Silhouettes die set and then added the embossed flock to it as well. For my background, I embossed the Woodgrain texture fancy die over Hero Arts sand cardstock. I wanted some color at the center of my wreath, so I'm just dabbing on some white unicorn ink. There was some residual gray ink on my dauber, so it did transfer a little bit, but I kept moving forward because I thought it was okay. Anyway, I showed you the large brass ring there because that was how I drew my inspiration for this card. So in order to create or recreate that brass ring, I used 2 circle infinity dies and just created this ring from foil cardstock. Once I adhere that down, I can go ahead and assemble my wreath by arranging all the foliage and branches onto that brass ring. I start assembling my wreath by adding the flocked images and die cuts to it, layering it from the outside edges first, and working towards the center where the ends will meet. This allows me to hide the ends of the branches and creates a nice layered effect for a natural layered wreath look. I'm using an acrylic block to apply some pressure to help the images adhere better. And the last thing I'm going to do is apply my berries. Now to finish my wreath here, I'm going to add a little red bow that I've cut from some ribbon and tied. And then I'm going to add some gathered red thread. I thought that would be a nice touch for my wreath. So I'm gluing that together using a little glue dot. And the final step is to add my sentiment. I am stamping the sentiment and embossing with gold embossing powder, and I'm going to cut that strip down and adhere it with foam tape to the bottom of my wreath. The last and final thing I did was embellish my card with some clear flat sequins. I just added them in random places to fill my card up, and I thought that was a nice finishing touch. I hope I was able to teach you something new today with the flocking technique that I shared. You probably have all the tools and supplies in your craft room to spice up your holiday cards. So thank you so much for stopping by today and have a wonderful day. Bye!